see now.
Oh, the order. It's different today. It goes Rami, Maya, because now since you don't do the spiel, Maya always last. Yeah. Rami, Maya, Anais, Gerald.
Okay, and we are live.
All right. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Rami.
I'm Maya.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Gerald.
All right, so today's story is The Lottery, written by Shirley Jackson, and it describes a quaint small town of about 300 people. On a nice summer day in June, the flowers are blooming, and everyone around the town is buzzing because there's a lottery, an annual lottery that they have, where the whole town gathers and everyone gets together and chats and meets each other. It's a very social occasion, and everyone in the town is involved, and people start drawing out names in the lottery. And there's a little bit of nervousness, but for the most part, everyone is fine and going about their duties, and it's very official. And at the end of it, there's a winner, I guess you can say, of the lottery. And it turns out that the lottery is for stoning the person to death.
Yep. And Rami picked this story.
And we presume it's stoned to death. It never actually says.
Oh, it's implied. It's heavily implied.
Oh, yeah.
So, wait, what's heavily implied? The stoning? The stoning said.
Yeah, the stoning is said. The death. The death part. Usually if you get hit by rocks, it implies death. But considering
the death's going to come slow.
48.
Yeah. They made those stones smooth. They're dragging
Except for the really big one that lady was having a hard time carrying.
Yeah, 2 people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, we always start these shows at the top level. So, what was everyone's initial impressions? How did you guys like it?
Yeah, I normally start, don't I? Yeah, I liked it. I was a bit anxious at the start. I thought it might be a sort of racial thing, but it's but no, it's a nice little story.
Loved it. I was very tense throughout the entire reading. I found it penetrating, and it stuck with me.
Yeah, I loved it, like way more than I thought I would when I first started reading it. Like hardcore loved it in a way that really surprised me, to the point that I started writing in caps when I was doing my notes. Like, oh my God. Because I think, we can discuss
when
why,
you get your mental caps on, then that's a good sign, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
I'll
Rami?
give you props for that. Oh, look at 2 thumbs way up.
Yeah. And Rami, what did you think?
So you know how I told you before that I didn't really like rereading stories? I feel like this story, as good as it is the first time, it gets even better with the second read. And I'm talking second read like this was maybe 10 or more years ago in between, but I still remembered it.
Yeah. I think this is one of those stories that really sticks with you. It was funny. As I was reading it, I started wondering if I'd read it before, because it felt really familiar. I'm still not entirely sure that I've read it, because
this is why it's the Hunger Games, basically.
Well, yeah, it's the Hunger Games. It's a lot of things. It's Battle Royale. I mean, this was 1948, and this sparked like a feeling I'm sure we see in lots of different books and literature. But I did feel like I had read it before, but I didn't remember actually reading it. And I'm thinking that I might have, like in middle school. It felt like one of those things that I knew. I know that it was made into some short films. I know that a lot of writers have been influenced by this story, obviously. So I'm not exactly sure if I've read it before or not, but it's definitely sticking with me. I loved it like you, Anais. I had my mental caps on, and it felt good to read that. I'm surprised that all of us loved it, though. Usually there's somebody that hates it. And this is our second week that we've pretty much all loved it. I think that says something for the quality of story.
I didn't love it. I didn't love it. and I'm gonna have to try and work out why I didn't love it.
Okay.
But I don't know. It was, I enjoyed it, but it was, okay.
I found the history of the story really interesting too. It was written in 1948, and after it was published, it created huge amounts of hate mail for the New Yorker and the author. Huge amounts of hate mail. And I thought, wow, like it must have really touched on something very deep.
Do you know what the hate was about?
How dare you write a story like this? It's dark, it's evil, it's criticizing.
I mean, it is very, very critical of, because you were saying, what was it you said earlier? Oh, you were bringing up examples like the Hunger Games and Battle Royale. And I was like, the thing is, we can also pull examples from real history, both fiction and history. So it's like, and what I like about it is that she's not specific in the thing that she's criticizing. I mean, you can start taking guesses from the time it was written, but you can put this at any point in time in the past or in the future, and you can be like, you know what this makes me think of? It constantly makes you think of something where some tradition isn't questioned, or there's some persecution at random, or some ritualized murder, and you're like, there it is again.
Yeah, exactly. It brought to mind two things as I was reading it. The first thing that came to my mind, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm sure there's a connection that my subconscious is making, was a Scarlet Letter. The second thing that came to mind as I was reading the story was an old South Park episode where they were talking about Lindsay Lohan and and how there has to be a rise of an idol, and then everyone turns on the idol to bring the idol down, and all these child stars were coming up as these idols, and it brought to mind that too. It was like the glee of watching someone go down. I think that this is a very dark part of our human instinct. I think all of us have it because I like to live in the gray, and I think people inherently have all of that. And I think that this story touches on that in a really uncomfortable, icky way when you're reading it. Like, you feel dread. I definitely felt dread as I was reading it. I felt uncomfortable as I was reading it. And at the end, I kind of felt like I need to take a shower. Maybe pray a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with
because I think
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I agree with what you were saying, that it can be placed in any point in history, but given especially at the time it was written, for me, I was just thinking about Nazi Germany and, everyone saying, how can all these people just be so complicit and going along with what's happening? And I know, like, I'm learning a bit about this too with like psychology, this whole idea of moral disengagement, which was presented by one of the most famous psychologists ever. His name's Albert Bandura. And he talks about how people just, the problem with it is that it's easy to justify what we do because we're able to manipulate how we structure things in our own minds, basically.
Yeah, it also brought to mind the theory, and multiple studies have shown that when people are in groups, we are less likely to act in a moral way because we have the excuse of the group. And I think any one of these people, if you had handed them a rock and said, go stone somebody, they would have looked at you and said, what are you talking about? But together as a human group, suddenly it is a moral good. Now, in this story, the way I interpreted it was they were doing this in order to promote healthy crops, and that this was something that was done in multiple locations. I definitely got the feeling that it was in the U.S. I don't think it's ever implied, but it had a very Puritan, old U.S. feel to it. And I'm just wondering, what did you guys pick up as far as symbolism?
So for me, like you were saying, you said that you think it was to promote crops, and the reason why I made like a little like face there is like, yes, that's what Old Man Warner says, but I feel like
control.
Obviously not. And it's not even control. I think it's just a superstition. It's just like there is a fear that if the crop fails or whatever it is, like something is going to happen that you're afraid of. So you create this system. I mean, the whole thing is very not formal, but there's rules you can't break that are arbitrary. Like you can't replace the box, and everyone must hold it but not look. Everyone has to look at the same time, and it must be Mr. Summers, right? Like there's all these things that you have to do, which make the tradition seem more legitimate, but it isn't. And when Old Man Warner's presenting the case, what does he do when there's people who say maybe we shouldn't do the lottery in the north, in the other village? He's like, oh, they're all a bunch of fools. If they want us living in caves, we're going to have stewed chickweed and acorns, like this ultimate straw man theory and slippery slope of like, if we don't do the lottery, we're going to go back to living in caves, right? Like that's the only defense of it, is this kind of ridiculous
But we do
backslide.
that. We do that.
Exactly. We do that. That's why I thought it was genius. It was genius because like that's it. That's the only defense. It's crazy.
Yeah, but that's just because we perceive it that way. One of the things that I was thinking of, when it was brought up that this was done because it's good for the crops, was that it wasn't so much that stoning somebody would make the crops grow, but stoning someone created cohesion within the group, within the village. And that would symbolically help the community grow. Creepy thought, but that's where my head went.
I would have wanted to see maybe part 2 when Old Man Warner finally gets his comeuppance. He's like, I've been in it 77 times, and let's see when it's your turn what you think of the lottery.
It'll never come up for him.
Oh,
He's got the thing up his sleeve.
You think he's got it rigged?
Of course he has. Of course he has.
No.
And
well,
yeah, it's the whole story reminded me of the film with Edward Woodward called The Wicker Man. It's the same sort of thing. It's this whole sort of idea of sacrifice, and I think it was, yes, the idea was it was to guarantee the crops and guarantee the good fortune of the village and the town, but it becomes a habit, and even in professional cycling, certain cyclists wear the same socks each day because they won a stage, so the next day they're going to wear those same socks because you can see it sort of reverberates throughout history, and people are still doing things like this. Obviously, hopefully not stoning people, but yeah.
Well, I think we kind of do. If you look at our legal system, if you look at lots of things that we do,
traditions.
By
tradition.
We are one of the last developed nations with a death penalty, and I think in large part because we feel like it's worked, it deters crime, even though we have no proof of that. In essence, it boils down to it's something that we do, and it's quote unquote tradition.
But that is used as punishment, isn't it, for a specific?
It is used as it's not. It's not though. But if you listen to people give the rationale for the death penalty, it's not even so much to punish that particular person; it's to deter crime from other people committing a similar crime. So, I think we do have those things in our society that they do even go to that level, but we don't perceive them as that because it feels normal to us.
Yeah, but they every year they do this, and it's pure chance. From Old Man Warner.
Listen to that sounding all judgy.
Well, and I think there was two things. There was Old Man Warner, the old people like defending it, and I think there was also that creepy thing where like as soon as Tessie Hutchinson gets it, somebody puts a stone in her own baby son's hand, little baby, her kid, like. Yeah, you have to break the bond of your own family members.
Yeah, that was really heart-wrenching. For a while, I was just like, please don't let it be the baby. Please don't let it be the baby. And, you got to think, like, that whole part of the story, the tension in that section of the story. Let's talk a little bit about this writing. The writing was very even. The writing was not choppy. They were not using a lot of huge emotional type writing, except for Tess saying that's not fair. Like that was the extent of the emotionality, yet something in the story kept the tension ramped up throughout the remaining of the story. I'm not exactly sure how that was done. What do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, because you knew it was a lottery. You knew they were drawing lots for something. So, and that I thought the pacing was really lovely because it was a very steady, slow pace. It was never boring. It was always building towards the draw of the lots. So it was, and that tension kept high, even with sort of, slightly more amusing parts, just to release the tension, and the tension ramps up again. It was, no, it was very well done.
Yeah, what I think maybe when you mentioned the tension, because it was very easy to read, and it was like simple language for the most part, and I got through it. But I think Mr. Summers, the guy who was in charge of running the whole thing, has just a very procedural, just efficiency type of thing, and he's like, all right, let's get over this quickly, let's get this over with quickly, like, come on everyone, let's do this. And I think that kind of contributed to building up the tension and the pace of it.
I think that there were also a lot of little things along the way that hinted to something bad was coming. And so even though the writing had a very relaxed feel to it, that I think that gave you an impending sense of dread. As they're standing there, they're looking around. Some of them are clutching things. Some of them are looking nervous. I think that all lent a sense of what exactly is going on here. But because we've had this history of this story this is part of the American canon. I'm wondering if the original readers of the story had that same level of dread and tension that we have, because we know what's coming. Even if we don't actually know what's coming, we've seen enough of these movies and books to know something bad's on the horizon.
Yeah, but see, I think that's why I loved it so much. Because right from the beginning, obviously, I'm thinking, what's the bad thing that's going to happen? Or else why are you writing the story, right? So what I thought was going to happen is because she spent so much time describing by name the relationships between the villagers. They say hi to each other. Mrs. This says hi to Mrs. That, and how's your kid, and blah, blah, blah. That what I thought it was going to be was whoever wins the lottery would be sort of suspected of cheating, how those bonds break down. I thought it was going to go in that, like maybe Mr. Summers rigged it, or he didn't rig it. People think he rigged it. So I thought it was going to be the bonds that she established get broken. It did get broken, but not at all in a way that I expected. Mm-hmm. And that's why when all of a sudden it was Mrs. Hutchinson, the wife of the winner, who's complaining, I went, whoa, 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 whoa. Right?
Yeah.
Like so that was when I had this, like, that was a great plot twist.
Yeah, I also liked that when Tess was so upset, her husband had to read her slip because she just was not accepting of what was going on. And yet that she's gone through this exact same thing multiple times, but it's always different when it's you. And I think that part of human nature was shown really, really wonderfully.
Well, it made me think of actually the story from a few years ago with Justine Sacco, the Twitter thing. So she had tweeted this joke where she was mocking an opinion that she would never have. But text, that gets lost. People thought it was her opinion. And by the time, so she made that tweet before she got on a plane from London to Johannesburg. Yeah. And by the time she landed, she was fired. She was already fired.
Yeah.
And just everyone bore down on her. She couldn't get a job anywhere. She had to go get a job at some small NGO for a few months afterwards because she couldn't show her face in any major city. She was torn down, just in this horrible way. And the guy who had started it, Sam Biddle in Gawker, a few years later, it happened to him. He made a joke mocking an opinion he would never had. People thought it was his opinion. And then once it happened to him, now he issues an apology to her. He was all for being part of the teardown army until it happens to him. So it really made me think of that, that flip.
Yeah. There's lots of examples of that. I think that we all do tend to pile on in groups. I think that this particular story, I think that might be one of the reasons why it stuck with me so much, because it felt so real that something like this could happen. We would like to think that we're better than this, but I know better. We're all just one step away from stoning each other.
It's not quite as severe, but when we found that whenever we go away with other people with RVs and we gather together as a group, as individuals, we suddenly become a lot more noisy and a lot more antisocial. And so this sort of group psychology thing means that we're part of a bigger group and no one can touch us. We can do what we like because we're part of this group, and it's very, very strange. And you think if you were on your own, you would never do anything like that, but because you're part of the group, it's okay, it's no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, guys. Mm-hmm. Whoa, 1 second. I'm going to let whatever that was pass. You can chop that out in editing. That was horrible. That was even worse than my garbage can outside. I feel like this story was a story that we all really enjoyed and that it definitely deserves its place in the American canon. If my kids have not read it, they definitely will. I'm going to ask you, do you guys think that the story will still be so widely taught and read in the next, 50 years? I think it has staying power.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Yeah, we don't. It's not something I've come across over here, so it's kind of interesting. We certainly have the same sort of psychological dystopia in the past and in the present.
It's interesting. A lot of books and stories in the American canon don't necessarily feel so quintessentially American. This particular story, there's something about it that feels very much part of the American canon. And I'm still trying to put my fingers on what exactly it is that does that. Is the simplicity of language? What do you think, Anais?
I was going to say, it's like you said earlier in the discussion, the kind of like Puritan way of justifying everything. But one thing, as you were saying it, that I thought of, also the names, like you have like the very kind of like Anglo-Saxon surnames, but then on top of that, you have like one Italian one, Zanini, and then Delacroix, right, is in there, which gives you that kind of melting pot, but not really melting invasion. But I also had a thought but if you told me that this took place in Tokyo and you gave them all Japanese last names, I could still see the story playing out. Maybe the justifications are a little different. Maybe now it's to a Shinto god in like the early 18th century, but it doesn't matter. Like you could still have a lottery where they end up killing someone, right?
Oh, totally.
So I do think,
question is, if this story had Japanese names and you were told it was written in Japan, but all the writing was the same, would it still feel American? I think it would. I think there's something about the writing itself that feels very much a part of the American canon. I don't think it reads like a Japanese story.
I think it's the dialogue to some extent too. Like her saying like, when she was running late, you wouldn't want to leave me having not done the dishes. And I don't know, like things like that. It's like the exchanges kind of feel like things Americans would say to each other.
Yeah, it's kind of. I'm just sort of kind of wondering now because America doesn't have like centuries and centuries of history. As America, obviously, the land does have history, and for us in the UK, it's we can see this sort of thing happening like centuries ago, and the traditions from the Middle Ages and things like that, and the same in Japan, and it's kind of interesting to hear you sort of not claim the story, but sort of relate to it, and saying it feels American, and yet you don't have this sort of centuries and centuries of history.
Perhaps not, but do you know the whole crap that went on when you guys first got here?
Yeah, but I think I get what Gerald's saying, because I think maybe what's happening is we're reading it and we're like, this is so American, because yes, it's written by an American person. It's
too.
Yeah, so we see it and we're like, I know this, I'm in there. But I think any culture could really take this story, take the same plot, take the same idea, and be like, "Oh yeah, that is so Japanese." If you wrote it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
if a Japanese author,
it feels American, not because of the plot, but something about the writing feels very much like an American writer. Whereas a lot of writers in the American canon, they are so influenced by the English writers that when you read their work, they still feel very English, even though they're American writers. There's something about the language in this story that feels very much like an American writer. And to the point where I didn't have to wonder, was it Canadian, was it UK? Like I read it and knew right away this is an American story. And I think that there are stylistic differences beyond spelling. Okay, yeah, color, whatever. Beyond that, there seem to be stylistic differences, at least before the digital age, between American writers and UK writers. I think those differences are closing. Now that, when you're talking about publications and stuff, the American market is just so huge. We're kind of running roundshot over everybody. But I think before that, you could read an English writer and you could tell this is an English writer.
Yeah. I was also going to say, I was just looking at my notes. Also, Rami, by the way, this is still a parable though, but it's a parable with an adult lesson.
Yes, this is an acceptable parable. You're allowed to submit stories like this, Rami. You get the okay on stories like this. There must be layers.
Parables for adults.
I disagree though. I beg to.
It is a parable. How is it not a parable?
Oh, I want to hear this.
Because it doesn't have like that. Oh, it's not like that overtly moral lesson at the end or something.
On what planet and what story did you read?
No, like parable. Like I would describe parable as like take three questions where like the person actually gives him an answer at the end. This is just the story of things happening, and then we apply our own interpretations to it.
Oh my goodness. My mind is blown. I don't think that the parable has to be explicit. It doesn't have to say, okay, this is how I want you to think. I think that I think a lot of parables do that because they are meant for children. But I think, I think Annie has a point. This is a parable. It doesn't have to be explicit because we all know you shouldn't be stoning people. Do they really need to say, she was stoned and it was bad? Don't do this, children.
It's kind of like the story, the ancient like Chinese fable that it was like the prince says to all of the potential suitors, make this flower pot have a beautiful flower, but all of the seeds he gave them were barren.
Here, straight from Wikipedia, okay? A parable often involves a character who faces a moral dilemma or one who makes a bad decision then suffers the unintended consequences. Where is that here?
Often. Okay.
It sketches a setting, describes an action, and shows the results. We don't know what happens after that.
We know she died.
No, okay. No, I mean but the repercussions of that too.
Okay, but a parable not on Wikipedia.
And it's something.
Don't make me pull out my OED.
Suggest how a person should
I just
behave.
pulled up Wikipedia.
Okay.
You're pulling up Wikipedia and you are reading very selectively, sir. Because the first line is it's succinct, didactic, prose or verse illustrates one or more instructive lessons or principles. You just chose the version you wanted.
No, but succinct and prose that applies to so many stories. And of course, any story.
Short allegory. I'm going to read from the dictionary. A short allegorical story designed to illustrate or teach some truth, religious principle, or moral lesson. You cannot tell me that this story doesn't have a moral lesson just because it doesn't knock you over the head with it.
No, but every story that has a moral lesson isn't a parable. That's my point.
Yeah, because they aren't all allegorical stories. They're not all short. They're not. A story may have a moral lesson, but that may not be how the story was constructed specifically to create that moral lesson. I think that this story definitely reads like an allegory. It is simplified. It is short. It is definitely allegorical. This story is not actually about stoning people. This story is about war. It is about how we treat people when we're in groups. It is about lots of things, but it is being shown in this way
No,
in
I'll
order
tell you,
to
if it
illustrate this
was
principle.
if it was a parable, it would have shown how stoning her was a bad thing.
I don't
I
think
think.
that parables for adults necessarily do that. I think that that explicit nature is
No,
what we expect of parables for children.
think of the Bible. Think of religious texts. They don't just
Parables for children.
they
Okay,
don't say
watch
like,
me
okay,
get
and then
stoned.
this
We should probably cut that part
and
out
then
of our
this
title.
person
You're
went
like,
through
so
hell, and then
Maya
this
offends 75% of listeners.
I'm cutting it out for your own good, Maya.
You. Thank you.
Gerald,
Yes.
what's your
You can send the
insight on
hate
this?
mail to the contact
Just
form
pause
on
on-
literaryroadhouse.com.
Yeah, I don't agree that it's a parable. To be honest,
There you go.
Oh, gosh.
Go ahead, Gerald.
Tell us why we're wrong, because Rami's not making any sense to me.
because there is no right or wrong. It's what. No, because we're judging it.
We're judging. That's
We're
what I
judging
mean.
it
It's not.
from our position.
Okay,
But we
it's
are
a universal.
judge it. That's like how the story is constructed.
Not
We are
every
supposed to be
story
judging
This
it.
is
with a moral lesson is a parable, and not every
Okay.
short story with a moral lesson is a parable.
I think some
Okay.
stories are left ambiguous at the end for artistic reasons, and some are left ambiguous at the end in order to let the reader decide how they feel about the story. I
Okay.
feel like this was designed
Yes.
that way. For Eddie,
Yes,
this is
but
like,
this is
Mom,
not
she's
So
like,
it's a story.
but this is
Rami
not
said,
ambiguous.
Maya, start using our first
No. I agree with Maya that yes, some stories are open ended so that the reader can make a judgment call. What reader's going to be like that stoning was totally appropriate? Like
I think in certain countries that they would read it that way. Okay.
not for this in this way. Like maybe if she had actually done something wrong, broken some rule, but just like your name picked, I don't think there's any.
We're talking.
In the parable, the characters in the parable have to learn the lesson.
Exactly.
It's
Well, I
not
think
for us
Tess learned the
readers.
lesson.
And we learn by the character learning in the parable. Like the characters realizes whatever larger truth or lesson, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's true. And then we read it and we learn from it as well.
Yeah.
Listen to Rami finding his voice, just gonna tell me where I'm wrong. I love it.
You can have your own opinion.
No, I love it. I love it. I got you all riled up. I didn't think that was possible. Usually you're just like so calm and smooth.
Guys. I went to Google. Yahoo Answers 2007. Question: is the lottery by Shirley Jackson a parable? Not kidding. The best answer that got upvoted the most is, I think it's a parable. But there's a lot of people say
That
think
is
it's not.
hysterical.
So it goes
That
back
is
and forth.
hysterical.
But this is an argument that many people have had.
And we totally just
But the
walked
best
right into that,
answer
didn't we? But I think it's interesting that we walked
we
right into
did.
an argument and we have a 50-50 divide here.
Yeah. And I'm saying, looking at these Yahoo Answers from 2007, the case against it being a parable is just as lengthy and thought out. So
Yeah, I think it definitely can.
You know-
That is interesting.
I have a theory talking about group psychology. I have a theory why Rami is becoming more outspoken with his opinions, and it's because of Blab. Because he's there on the screen, so he's empowered to speak. Whereas with the Hangouts, he's down in a little box, and he thinks, "Oh, I'm not going to speak. I'm just
You know
gonna
what, Gerald? You're making the psych student in me wish I was still in school so I could do some study.
I'm giving Gerald props so he keeps talking because of the blab.
Psychology. We're giving him positive reinforcement.
Yes, we are. So now, was there anything else about the story that we wanted to cover before we go ahead and rate it? I mean, this story is a pretty meaty story, but I feel like we all liked it to some extent. I mean, Gerald's, less than the rest of us. Gerald, what was it about the story that that didn't set your pants on fire?
Well, because it's obviously not a parable, so it doesn't resonate. No, I'm playing.
Throw down.
Take those props back. I don't know. It's just a story of something that went on, and it doesn't really mean anything to me, which is sort of kind of
That
weird.
is interesting. So
Yeah.
you're just like, oh yeah, it's just a story that went on. The stoning of the woman didn't bother you. You were just like, eh.
Well,
I also like that it had to be Mrs. Hutchinson, right? Like, she was the only one who showed up late and didn't have the ultimate reverence for the lottery. She must be stoned. Not that I'm not saying they rigged it to kill her, but just the choice from the author perspective of having the more free spirit character be the one that gets stoned.
I think that the only choice that would have been, I think the choice of the child, if she had chosen the baby, which was something I was dreading, I think if she had chosen the baby to be the one to be stoned, I don't think the story would have been published. I don't think a lot of people would have finished the story. Like, as it is, the story insulted everyone's emotion so much that, like, the history of the New Yorker, this was the one that they had boxes of hate mail come to. And I think had it been the baby, I think the story would have been overbearing. I think that Miss Hutchinson's, because she was the free-spirited choice, she was the adult version of the child. She was free-spirited, she was interesting, and so she's the one that gets stoned, you know, and it makes sense from an authorial point of view, because that way you can still get that same emotional response without turning off readers so much they don't actually finish the story.
Yeah, I think that would have made more impact on me had there been something else other than an element of luck in it. If it
was rigged.
Yeah, if it was rigged, or if it was obvious to the reader that it was rigged, or influenced in some way, that yes, the free spirit doesn't fit in with the rest of the group, therefore they have to be excluded by the stoning. So
because then you probably would have had more of an emotional attachment to the person who ended up being stoned.
Yeah. So
that makes sense, because as it's written, the characters, they kind of all, like, there was no one character to me that I felt aligned with. I'm fine with that, but I think what I'm hearing you say is, if one of the characters, if you had been more empathetic towards one of the characters and you would have had more of an emotional tie at the end, and you weren't as empathetic because it was so random and not enough time was spent with any one character. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Gerald?
Yeah, I think so. And I think if we'd been introduced to her earlier, and we'd created an attachment to her, and if she'd made comments about the lottery and you know, perhaps in previous weeks saying, oh, you know, I don't know why we do this sort of thing, you know, that sort of thing. But and then you could think, you know, was she chosen deliberately? But and I also thought it was interesting that the female author chose to stone a female character.
What, we can't stone our own?
No, I'm not saying, but you said if they'd chosen a child, then people would have been turned off and would have been horrified by that, and that's I think it's sort of reasonably interesting. But
yeah. I had a thought as you were talking, and now I can't remember what I was going to say. I hate that.
Yeah, well, a thought that I had while he was talking was, I think I get what you're saying. It would have been enriched in a different way, though. It would have been a different story if she's giving you clues that maybe they had rigged it. I think they didn't rig it. I think the choice to make it Mrs. Hutchinson was like a meta-authorial choice. I think the choice the author made, but I don't think the truth of the story is that they rigged it. And I think it's that randomness that speaks to her ultimate point. It isn't like, oh, people for the slightest infractions will be conspired against. It's that sometimes persecution is random. Scapegoating is random. Like it's just a need that is in the society to do that, to like punish.
Yeah.
And that's good that you know, you're not picked on because of how you are or how you look or what you are. So in that respect, the story is good because it's completely random. You know, there is no
It allows you to put yourself in the position of any of the characters, because you can't read the story and say, oh yeah, that wouldn't happen to me because I'm not ... on a subconscious level. What I was thinking, thank you for reminding me of my thought process, Annie's. What I was thinking as Gerald was talking was that if the story had spent more time with one of the characters and allowed us to build empathy with the characters, if the story had been about a character rather than these people as a group, as a character, I feel like that would have been a much more modern story. I feel like there's something very old, a very fairy tale, parable, there I use that word again, about the story where, you know, in a lot of those stories you see archetypes used as a shortcut for character. So instead of saying there's a woman and she has a husband and she was raised here and she talked this way, you hear she was the cobbler's wife, because that is shorthand for something. And I feel like a lot of the characterizations in the story were done in that way as shorthand. So we know that Tess is the more free-spirited person, not because we know a lot about her past, but because she was characterized in a very shorthand way that, to me, is reminiscent of some of those older stories. So are we ready to rate this puppy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So while we were discussing earlier on, I'm sorry, I don't do history. I hate history. So I looked up when the Pilgrims landed in America. It was 1620. That was a long time ago.
You didn't know that? It was a very long time ago.
I didn't know. But
Yeah.
I don't do history. Just so you do have history. I'll give you that.
You're like, yeah,
It
that
wasn't
young
America
country,
at that point.
They
It was
haven't been around
still
very long.
It was, yeah, because wasn't it named by Americo
Vespucci.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been around for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's
Not
still
as long as you guys.
comparison the history of other places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are
Plus-
parts of
plus
America
you said
that
the
feel
Pilgrims-
much older than others, too.
Yeah, because you're talking about the Pilgrim 1620, but before that there was other settlements like Jamestown, and then before that the Spanish. Like
Yeah,
it goes
you go
further
to
back.
Louisiana, it
But-
feels old. There are parts that, I mean, we don't have any areas like you do where you go certain places and it feels like centuries, you know. The closest you can get to that is some of the Native American settlements. But, you know, as far as European invasion settlements, Louisiana, what else? Virginia, parts of Virginia
thinking
feel
Florida.
very, very old.
Florida has cities from the 1500s because of the
Yeah.
Spanish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okie dokie. So let's rate this puppy. I am going to give it a very obvious 6. I know I say it every time about the sky opening up and the angels singing. That happened for me this time. I know that in 15 years, I'm still going to think back on the story. And that when I have grandchildren and I put them on my knee, I'm going to pull out the story, much to my children's horror. And I'm going to talk about stoning people in American literature. So how do you rate this story?
I like how when you said the sky's opening up, both Gerald and I looked up.
You know what? When you guys did that, I was thinking Brady Bunch.
I'm looking for inspiration.
Sixes, 2 6s, make that 2 6s.
Okay, Gerald.
Come back to me.
Okay, Annie's.
I was going to come back to me. Okay, I think this is a rare example where my rating came down after the discussion.
Wow, what did that?
Yeah. So I think what happened was the plot twist left me so blindsided. Like it really came out of nowhere that I was like, what? Like that. This is going to sound really snobby of me, but like very rarely does a plot twist happen. We're like this plot twist. I'm like, that was a good plot twist. How well done and delivered. When all of a sudden Mrs. Hutchinson is upset that her family won the lottery. That plot. It was a plot twist for me because I thought it was going to be people were upset with the lottery result for different reasons.
To me, it just felt like a natural
I didn't
outcome.
think
It
the
didn't
winner
feel surprising at all.
It's like an
If
ultimate.
your
It felt
family gets
surprising to
chosen
me.
and you know that you guys have been stoning people for centuries, wouldn't you be a little upset? And
No,
Right, but I
for the
didn't know that
reader,
they've
for
been
the
stoning
reader.
people. For the reader.
I knew it was
I
coming.
don't know they've been stolen. I heard the word lottery. I assumed it was going to be a good thing for the winner that other people would be jealous of, and that would
So you
be the
didn't know
conflict.
until then that it was a
jealous-
bad thing. Oh,
no,
I did.
That's exactly. That's
interesting.
No, I didn't.
wish we hadn't rated. Now I want to pick you apart. I want to know what it was about the story that tipped it off to me that didn't tip it off to you.
I
so
really
what is
don't
your
know.
rating?
But all of a sudden when that plot twist happens, so that made me be like 6 because I was so blindsided. But upon further discussion, it is simple, it's effective, it's timeless. But aside from that, it isn't like this is a story that I was like dying to discuss for hours on end. Saunders is the problem. Saunders is the problem. Kenichi Prophecy plus Saunders.
You cannot submit yourself to the Kenichi Prophecy. Just because you've rated one story a 6 doesn't mean a different story can't be rated a 6.
I understand.
Can love them equally and separately. I have twins. Trust me, it works.
No, but this is different though, because also while the writing was expertly handled in the way that she did things, there wasn't things about the writing that made me go, ho, 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 I see what you did there. Like I've done with some other authors that as we read it, I'm like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it came down to a 5.5.
Like an intellectual tour de force to have a huge emotional impact and stay with you for the rest of your life.
Can read it however she wants. Okay.
She's wrong. That's okay.
5.5 is good.
You know, we're right. We know what's up. Okay, Gerald.
Came down.
Break my heart.
From ear to ear, because it's obviously a 5.5 story.
Yeah.
Look at you.
We should do like a little high five now that we're on the bottom.
You have to go the other direction.
I think
I'm on this side. Oh, I must have flipped around. I'm on this side of my screen.
You guys are opposite, so you guys are like doing this.
Yeah. Anyway.
We'll get the directions right eventually. Raise the Remy. Okay, that was just bad and tacky.
Yeah.
So we are submitting stories for next week, and the story that actually you guys do first because mine's in my planner.
I'm
feel free to cut that out too, Annie.
I forgot.
You forgot. Okay. Here is. Mm-hmm.
Go on.
No, you go.
So, Carve magazine, and it's Saint Augustine the Starfighter.
One of these days, people are gonna think that we must be getting paid from Carve magazine, but really, we just really, really like their stories.
Or Gerald. Gerald has lately done all the Carve submissions.
I love them.
I love them. I'm never disappointed.
All right.
I'll go. So I'm doing the same one I've been doing for weeks, Drinking Coffee Elsewhere by ZZ Packer.
And next? Oh, that's me. That is me. I just want to make sure I've got this right. Okay, because here's the thing. I've been thinking a lot about when we read Junot Diaz, Cheater's Guide to Love, and then I read Brief and Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde, and how parts of the writing made me super, super excited, and then other parts of the writing just left me wanting and wondering if it's because when I was reading that, I hadn't gone through the growth process that Literary Roadhouse was forced me to go through, or if it was because I was listening to it in an audiobook. I feel like everyone has such huge thoughts about him as a writer, and I'm still a little confused on him, and I feel a little torn. So I decided that I wanted to submit a Junot Diaz story, Wildwood, and I can't find it now. It's a teenage runaway. So that's what I'm submitting. Okay. Quiz us, make me win.
All right, so because of the title of the story, first of all, I'm actually happy that all of you kind of like this story, because initially I was worried that because the theme has been like so overplayed, and Maya saying like you felt like you read it before, but I feel like this story was like the genesis of all that, unless something came before that. But all of the Hunger Games and what was the one you said, the Japanese Battle Royale, all of that I feel like stemmed from the idea of this story. Anyway, okay, so because of the title, the lottery, I will make today's game about the lottery.
Oh, great. Guess we're not reading Junot Diaz.
The U.S. lottery. And it's multiple choice. I don't expect any of you to know most of it. And, all right, no, let me ask the questions first. Okay, so I'll go clockwise. So in my screen, it's Anais first. Anais, the largest ever Powerball jackpot was estimated at 590.5 million. Oh, and this is the total amount, not the payout, like before taxes and everything.
Mhm.
So 590.5 million, 656 million, 1.6 billion, or 2.1 billion.
The second one, the
Nope,
600.
it was 1.6 billion. Yeah,
Oh,
I thought you would get
what?
that. It was all over the news
It just happened
because
not
it just
I don't
happened like a
remember
month
this.
ago.
Yeah, it just
Really?
happened. Like you
Oh,
weren't on
see,
Twitter watching people
mm-mm.
go absolutely insane.
Yeah, it was crazy.
No.
And there were
I
3
really
winners
didn't
for that
care.
one, so it's going to be split amongst them.
I remember seeing lottery stuff come up, but I never clicked or read. I didn't care.
All right, Gerald, next question. What were the odds of hitting that jackpot? All right, 176 million to 1,
I should have read
292 million to 1, 300 million to 1, or 324 million to 1. I can repeat
324.
if you want.
324.
No, 292.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
still
easy.
a lot.
okay, I'm ready.
All right, Mega Millions, Maya. The game that currently has the second largest jackpot in North American history, and I think theirs was the 656 million, began in what year? So 1987, 1990, 1995, 1996.
87.
96. Yeah.
What?
I found this out when I was researching this. I think most of the lotteries we have now began sometime in the 90s. In like
Yeah, I remember that. There was all the commercials about the lotteries. Great for schools. Yeah, I'm old. Okay, next.
All right, Anais. Powerball drawings are held every what day of the week? Wednesday and Saturday, Friday, Monday and Friday, or Tuesday and Saturday? I can repeat if you want.
I don't know. Tuesday and
Wednesday
Saturday.
and Saturday.
Look at all of us. Too good to know all about the opioid epidemics.
Yeah.
I like this question. Gerald, what percentage of winners decide to get plastic surgery after winning the lottery?
That's great.
Finish your laughing. Okay, you ready? All right, first 15%, 80%, 50%, or 1%?
15.
1. So it's
I
not,
love that somebody actually studied that. That's what I love about that question. Somebody had an answer.
but it's not as large as you might think, you know?
No.
Just 1%. Okay. Maya, what percentage of winners gain weight after winning? 12%, 32%, 51%, 75%.
12.
32.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, geez, these questions are harder than
You
I
would
thought.
think they would go and hire
We
a
got
bunch
no
of
points.
personal
No.
trainers and get skinny, not the other way around. I guess all that
Well,
Don Perignon adds up.
32 isn't that many either. I would have
It's
expected
a third.
All right, Anais, how much does the U.S. government automatically withhold from jackpots won by American citizens? This is separate from taxes, like it automatically withholds this amount. So it's 25%, 28%, 30%, or 35%.
Okay. Why do they do this?
fund-
Because it's supposed to
Fund the
generate
lottery.
revenue.
Oh, I see. So it's not that's apart
Yeah,
from the taxes that
just
you
they
pay
keep
as like
that amount.
okay. Okay. So what were the numbers again?
25%,
20,
28%, 30%, 35%.
28?
25. Oh. All right. Whoever gets like one more question right is gonna win. All right.
Wins.
Gerald.
Yep.
A woman named Joan R. Ginther has been called the luckiest woman in the world for winning the Texas lottery multiple times and receiving $1 million payouts each time. So how many times did she win? 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times?
3 times.
4. So actually, this is interesting because her winnings names have been called into question because she was revealed to be a former math professor with a PhD from Stanford University specializing in statistics. So
Hey,
some people
just
say that
because you
she...
can analyze stuff doesn't
Sounds
mean that you're
suspicious.
cheating.
No, and she
That's
always
awesome.
she bought her lotteries, like she always won. It was like 2 years apart, and she bought it from the same store in Texas, the same convenience store. So there might be something there.
Okay,
Might
All
be.
right.
I
This
got
is-
this. We're gonna
if
read
you
some
don't
Juno
get it-
Diaz.
If you don't get it, then we'll have the winner will be decided by the bonus. All right. So in the last question with this professor, what are the odds of something like that happening just by chance? Okay. So 1 in 18 trillion, that's 18 with 12 zeros behind it. 1 in 18 quintillion, that's 18 zeros. 1 in 18 sextillion, that's 21 zeros. Or 1 in 18 septillion, that's 24 zeros.
Trillion.
No, it's
Ah,
septillion. 1 in 18 that's 18 with 24 zeros. That's why, like,
I
the
can't
odds of
even
it happening by
conceptualize that
chance.
many zeros. I would have to sit down and write it on paper.
She figured something, and I think she stopped, like, after that was
I think
revealed.
she's a smart woman who knows her statistics.
All right,
So
so
what's
this...
the bonus
So then for
Oh, what were you gonna say, Annie?
I was gonna say, so then for the bonus, are you gonna give us a multiple choice?
Nope.
We each pick a different letter.
Nope.
Hey, now that
Okay.
we're all on the screen at the same time, we can all be like, hey, rock, paper, scissors.
No,
Like
so
we
the
couldn't do
bonus,
that on Google Hangouts. Now
I
we
like
can.
having the bonus be something you guess, and then the closest person to it wins. All right.
All right.
Okay.
So a bartender in Oregon once received a winning lottery ticket as a tip. So how much was that ticket worth? Anais, pick a number.
Was it a scratchy whatever? Was it like a Powerball or a Mega
It was a
Million?
I don't know, like, who, like the
It was probably a
lottery.
scratch
It was a
thing.
scratch, yeah, but I don't know if it was Powerball
Okay.
or Mega Millions.
I'm gonna say 1,000.
Okay,
A scratch thing.
Gerald.
I'll say 1.2 million.
Okay.
Scratches don't pay out that much, do they?
Some of them do if you live in interesting states. Our state's boring, so I don't.
Mine's boring too.
I don't think
Jersey,
ours-
if you get 200, you're like, woohoo!
Yeah, well, I don't play the lottery. I'm gonna say, is it closest not going over, or is it just closest?
Closest.
1 million.
We should have asked them.
And Anais is the winner. It's 17,500.
Woo! The only reason I know they don't pay out that much is because even though I don't ever buy lottery, my family has like a Christmas tradition where our stocking stuffers are like 3 of the scratch stuff. And I think my dad won like $50 when he was like, that was great. They don't pay out at all.
So take it away.
Okay. Yes, so we are reading, finally, Drinking Coffee Elsewhere by ZZ Packer. But before we go, one last comment on traditions. Literary Roadhouse has its own community rituals, such as sharing your thoughts on each week's story in the comments section at literaryroadhouse.com, checking out our other podcasts, the Literary Roadhouse Book Club and the Bradbury Challenge, and leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker. So go ahead, try it out, and discover that these traditions, unlike the one in this story, are good. Then please share this literary community with your friends. Until next time, read a good story.
I do love your outros so much. They make my heart happy. They're always just so inventive.
Wow, and we finished 8 on the dot. Look at that.
Yay.
Yes, we
Murph.
did. Okay, I can stop recording that.
Yep.
All right,
Episode
everyone.
56.
Have a good week.